just mentioned something about media. And I think we have to admit that media is part of, when the perfect storm hits, they are part of that ecosystem, right? And they often benefit from the chaos. So what do you do in that scenario with the media? How do you deal with them to work with them and actually not necessarily, what do you do in that scenario? Because that also could be, sometimes a problem for the communities to express themselves.
Look, from an advocate's point of view, community policy advocate peak organisation, communities are, there's a problem whether you're invited by the community to help. I was invited by the Muslim community to assist, but there are many instances where you have to wait and you can't necessarily give your expertise because it's intruding or they close off or for whatever reason. The other thing is very hard to control. I can say that from, like, if you're working in this space and if you call yourself a community advocate and you haven't experienced a perfect storm, you're about to enter something you've never experienced. Your day changes. My day for like 3 years was getting up at 4:30 in the morning, because you don't sleep well, you're under high levels of stress for a long period of time. So you're often, and when the media is involved and it's a perfect storm, things are coming hourly sometimes. And they're not just little hourlies, they're like small issues, media issues. They're like bringing an entire section in, adding a complete new layer of complexity on. So you end up getting up in the morning at 4:30 a.m, scanning all the newspapers, scanning all the social media blogs, scanning people in your network, finding quite a few issues. And by 5:30, you've sent off a whole bunch of emails to your boss. Then while you're getting showered and dressing and the phone's ringing because you're connected, work starts at 5:15, 5:30 in the morning with the other people who are going through the same thing. So this is a lifestyle change that happens. And if it's like that for me, popping in or being on the sideline and as Nail said, face-to-face is the best way to get to know a community and to gain trust and to understand and to give better advice. Can you imagine what it's like for the CEO or the person at the top? It's just, I also want to add that level of perfect storm stress is also being experienced by public officials, politicians, and more importantly, law enforcement. And one of the big things, Nail was talking about, I thought everyone would know this. I mean, the big shock for me is having to deal with people from that very senior people or people who are, look big and scary and carry guns, and you go, oh, but knowing that they themselves are experiencing high levels of stress and fear for their personal safety, and they are in an agitated state as well, so they can sound more defensive and angrier than they want to. So there's a great complexity of human behavior that mixes in with that. Okay, getting back to the thing of the media, it runs out of control and beyond you, and it becomes a job. And I want to say this: when something happens, there's two dimensions to this. It can be a community that is victimized or targeted by an attack, and absolutely a lot of those emergency responses and preparedness and response and recovery apply. But also, if you are part of a visible community where perhaps the perpetrator is from, you can suddenly experience vilification through the media, which sort of amplifies what is already in the community to a very loud extent. That is very difficult to process, highly stressful.
Yeah. Look, the media plays a massive role, okay? In any form of crisis management, you cannot deny the influence of the media, and they lead and they react at the same time. Okay, so sometimes journalists, actually are reacting to the news of the day, and immediately they shove a microphone in your face and say, "Please explain." They don't realize that they're just trying to make news, and they're reacting to the previous day's agenda. Okay, and whoever triggered a particular agenda, they themselves are reacting. On occasions, the media actually leading, they're framing they're influencing, but on a lot of occasions, they're merely doing their job and trying to get a few sound bites to try and say, okay, you know what, we are also, present. Now, with my experiences with the media, it's not all bad. There are a lot of really good journalists out there. Okay, and a lot of journalists do a really good job to try and do the right thing. Okay, to say, okay, look, let's try to make sense of this. But the dynamics of political ideology, political agendas, the owners of certain media publications, the sub-editors in the way that they actually frame the title. For example, if you are interviewed in a particular piece and everything is recorded wonderfully, the heading distorts the message, the purpose of the interview. I've had that on a few occasions, and it deliberately becomes provocative, where what the journalist wrote, you can't fault. Okay, you're happy with the interview, but the way the sub-editors and the editors have chosen to contextualize that story in a bigger agenda, then actually adds fuel to the fire.
I love that point, because there's a real awareness of the lack of, cultural diversity amongst news editors as well.
Yeah.
The back room of who structures that together. Yeah. So that's a really good point. Yeah.
So how we're talking about, in having trust in working with the government, having trust in working with community leaders, having trust even working with the public servants. You build trust working with the journalists. Okay, so you meet a journalist in a cafe, you got an interview, and they're decent people. Okay, so you establish a trusting relationship. So we don't actually have a problem in the way we work and develop trust with real people.
I hope I didn't look like I was like anti-media. I'm really, really supportive of them. But what I'm seeing with this intersection of faith, religion, and multiculturalism, and it's being acknowledged now, is that, especially we have this new dynamic of far-right extremism, or what they call ideological opposed to religious. We've been talking Islamophobia, they call that religious, and then far-right they term under ideological nowadays. So I think it's a little bit different now. And I think you can have a great interview and a great story in a fairly progressive or sympathetic, multiculturally sympathetic media. Yeah. And then once that goes up online, it's sort of opens rather to for other perhaps more conservative media to comment on it and to take the original story and to highlight and put fear and different divisions and use it to create divisions. And I think that's what we saw with the Manly Jersey LGBTI that went south. Certainly wasn't their intention, but just the way it unfolded. And when you start seeing patterns like that, I don't know, what do you advise the community? It's really, really tricky, and I think communities need to be more cautious, even if it is a terrifically trustworthy journalist. Once you put your story out there, you lose control of it. And for me personally, I was always very concerned when stories go south or are misused like that, and the effect on people when you talk to them afterwards is devastating. And I have actually had that happen to me with some of the work that I've done for Nell's community, which has gone global. And, for the best of intentions, you use exactly the same language and a perfectly reasonable language that would not be taken out of context with any other community that was not being targeted. But when you are under attack, there are many different forces that will take perfectly innocent, well-intentioned work and put a really deadly, awful spin on it, which isn't the truth. And so I tell you what, I really struggle with knowing sometimes how to advise an ethnic, multicultural faith community about whether they should talk to the media or not, because because especially once you've gone through that sort of being torn apart, not that your name will on it, but you've done work and it's been torn apart and misused, and you talk to people who are giving their life story, it's very personal for them. And you feel a great sense of responsibility about their safety. And I think that's where I'm really focused on. So I've come from that thing of being the bridge and gone, look, at some point you can't just be the bridge and make government also happy if what government is doing is really hurting community. So I do tend to come down more on community and go, look, I'm working for community here. I'm open to everyone, but at the end of the day, my priority is the community safety. And I think there are some people who might think that that's a little bit out of balance, and it should, and people who work in my sector think, no, it should always be this kind of government priority, law enforcement priority, community. But the power imbalance is really quite severe. And I think we need to have more people out there who are always polite and respectful to everyone, but go, no, I'm going to come back to getting the outcome for the community. I think the media, how you deal with the media is kind of comes down to who you're really working for.
Yeah, and if I may add, when something goes wrong with a particular article, okay, one of the experiences that the people that you are working with, whether other community leaders, multicultural, ethnic leaders, governments, soon as something goes wrong, you are misquoted in the media, you turn around and you realize that they've all done a runner. They don't have your back. Okay, and some politicians do throw you under the bus to try and save their own backside, and so that in itself is a real experience. So in one particular meeting, you're sitting around a table, all these wonderful people, saying all the right things about importance of multiculturalism, social cohesion, community safety, and the whole gamut of things. But as soon as you actually experience a particular incident where the media has played a role and they've somehow created you to be a problem, the people who are supposed to be with you are no longer there. And that's both within and outside of the community.
And Neil, how do you deal with that kind of situation when you find yourself into obviously self-care as well? I would love to know how you look after yourself, but also how do you deal with that situation? Because it can happen to any leader.
Well, as Carl said before, there's a great rate of burnout. Okay, and so no community leader is really prepared for this. You're not trained community leadership to manage crises and to I guess experience the shortcomings of the people who are purportedly there for you, and most people do not come back to community. So once you're so it's that issue about sustainability of people in leadership roles. Unfortunately, they get scarred and you lose them. There is a real case of burnout, which is really a topic which is under researched.
It's really under researched, under discussed period. And merging this new point with the old point question about the media, you need to be really wary because the media, I don't know, there's a lot of discussion at the moment about legislating for coercive control in domestic violence situations. Have you been aware of that discussion? And one of the articles that they often talk about is one of the ways it's called love bombing. Have you heard of that term? It's sort of a way of manipulating a person. I mean, I could put it into a male thing, but I'm trying to keep the gender out. The principle of love bombing is this incredible attention that you give to someone and sympathy and romance, and the person who's being controlled gets lulled into this incredible sense of false security and being loved, and it's going to last forever, and it's terrific. And I think intentionally or not, the media is a powerful part of the love bombing process for a community, either under attack or for individual leaders who for the moment are really useful to them.
Yeah.
And that includes a story or a family. It could be a mother with a tragedy. It could be anyone. from that one moment, you become part of the love bombing process. And the community really feels that love, but I have seen so many times that love just go suddenly, but also be used to kind of convince people to do things they don't really want to do, or talk about stuff they don't want to really give, or agree to things that they, under normal circumstances, they wouldn't agree to, or sign contracts that they wouldn't necessarily agree to as well. So I think love bombing is maybe a really good analogy for your viewers who might be familiar with that argument, in terms of how it feels overpowering security, which can go, and you become very dependent on it. And no matter how smart you are as a leader or an influencer, or how intelligent you think you are, everyone is susceptible to that approval, or that sense of we're with you. But it's like most movements today with a hashtag, they're very short-lived and they don't really dig down. And that's really what I tell people now. When they, do you think I should do this interview? I kind of tell them that process, and I sort of go, do it if you are aware of that. You know, just be really aware that it may, that support and that love bombing, and it can go. And it can feel very violent when it's pulled out from under you if you're still feeling vulnerable. So it's a complicated question of how to work with the media during this a perfect explosive perfect storm. Yeah.
Can I also note that the people in community leadership roles who are predominantly volunteers, and no matter how much training and support they may have, or how articulate they may be, there's also a personality, a dimension where they're not thick-skinned. They're not like, you know, how we say politicians are thick-skinned, therefore they will weather any particular, political internal crisis. Volunteers are themselves very sensitive people, okay? And they're stepping up to, trying to do the right thing. And be part of a solution, because it's expected upon you. Okay, if this is a Muslim problem, which it's defined as, okay, therefore we need Muslims to be part of the solution. Okay, and so it becomes obligatory, okay, to actually step on the scene. Someone has to step on the scene, and so there are certain internal community dynamics which propels you on the stage to say, okay, right, represent us. But these people are themselves not necessarily, the character-wise, they're not necessarily well prepared, because they're not thick-skinned. You need particular caliber of people to be able to weather the storm, and and they need to be able to survive one crisis to another. And unfortunately, the experience is that we lose a lot of really good people per each crisis, and they're lost not only to that community, but their value is lost to society, because they withdraw from all other community services.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, there is a bit of burnout involved, and you just want to step back. I mean, I've done it. I've stepped back. It's so intense. That was like an acid trip. I don't want to go through that again. And you step back, and it takes so much time to process what has happened, and then you see things happening again to different communities. And I think that's why I was happy to have this conversation, because it was like, clearly I can see we've got 1.2 Chinese Australians at the moment, and really bad situation happening in our region, and really quite uncontrolled conversations in the public sphere and in the media, getting back to the media, and really how that is making people feel, and how safe are they feeling. And I certainly think I'm really concerned, having gone through what I've supporting the Muslim community through those terrorist events and Islamophobia, which is an ongoing thing. It hasn't gone away. And I could see suddenly these analogies with, the next community that's going to be perhaps feeling very, very insecure, but also hearing those arguments in the media, getting back to the media about, and listening to commentators saying, let's say other governments in other countries make criticism of our social cohesion and our history and track record on racism or issues with the Asian community, which is completely historically correct. I mean, that's not a political argument. That's a basic historical argument, and anyone can go into their state library and read up on that. But for the communities, they may sometimes be frightened of raising the issue that reporting incidents or saying they feel under threat, because then they go, oh my goodness, it's going to sound like I'm supporting another government. No. You're not supporting anyone. You're just saying that you're a citizen who has concern about their safety. So the media plays a part in that, politicians, other groups, and I suppose I'm really saddened to see what's happened in the past. Sort of, we don't learn our lessons and then we repeat it. And I'm also concerned that the LGBTI community and trans community think that those issues don't relate to them, or they're somehow, because they've been loved bombed for a long time now. You know, I mean, I came out in the 80s when it was illegal and it was difficult. So I grew up in a period where physical safety was part of being LGBTIQ. And so I always had the social cohesion built into me from a young age. And then, of course, socially, there became more acceptance. But then in the last couple of years, as we've seen, not only is the LGBTI community being targeted more, but they're also kind of being used a little bit to mainstream some fairly conservative far-right arguments. And that complexity of like, we love you, hate you, love you, hate you, you know, typical abusive relationship stuff to control. But I sometimes feel like that part of my identity in that community are very complacent and feel they're so love bombed that they're not really that under threat. And they also need, they could learn the lesson from the Muslim community or from a religious community in terms of their safety and having those discussions in their community and leading from their community.